as you say, in the mid 70s, I started going to school at UC Santa Cruz in 72. I dropped out of school in the beginning of 74, kind of went through my Irish Catholic San Francisco drug, sex, rock and roll. I had a sort of a confrontation with suicide. And out of that, it's a much longer story, but I came back to Santa Cruz. And when I came back, I had to enroll in some courses. And the two, I was sort of like a Ouija board, sort of thing, where I found these courses by some guy named Gregory Bateson, called Steps to an Ecology of Mind, which sounded interesting. And this other guy, John Grinder, who at that time was teaching radical Marxism and the violent overthrow of the United States government by any means necessary. So the course was called The Political Economy of the United States. So I was, I was 19. I was totally open, having gone through certain experiences. And this was just at the time that John Grinder met Richard Bandler. So I was in the very first group that Grinder and Bandler did together on what became the meta model, which was sort of, the intersection of Grinder's transformational grammar work. He was a professor of linguistics, and Bandler's sort of street smart Gestalt, Santa Cruz mountain guy sort of thing. And it was, it was really intense. It was an amazing thing. This was, Judy Delosier was there, Leslie Cameron was there, David Gordon was there, Robert Dilts came in about a year and a half after that. And it was really intense. Bateson, of course, was the sort of like the godfather, the intellectual godfather. And through that, within about a year, I came to meet Milton Erickson. The Structure of Magic 1, the very first Bandler Grinda book, came out. Bateson read it, liked it. He loved The Structure of Magic. He did not like the rest of the books, but he said, "I think you guys are onto something. Go meet the great purple one out in the desert." Erickson was the purple one before Prince. And they came back, and something just sort of lit up inside of me, and this quiet voice said, "This is why you're here." So the next time they went out 2 months later, they brought me and Leslie and Judy, and that began my experience with Erickson. I continue to say this was all pre-NLP. I think NLP really, the name NLP started coming out in 1977. This is 1974 up to 1977. In 1977, I left Santa Cruz to go right over the hill in Silicon Valley to Stanford for graduate school in psychology. And I had at that time a rather sharp break with Bandler and Grinder and NLP for various reasons. Some of them, I think you might call, professional or epistemological. Others, I would say, I don't know if ethical is the right word, but there wasn't stuff that I was happy with. So from that time, 77 on, I have not been formally associated with NLP, although, I have a lot of dear friends and sponsors who are NLP luminaries. As you probably know, Robert Dilts is in a sense, my professional soulmate. And we've been developing this International Association of Regenerative Change, regenerative coaching. That's Robert and my baby. But I went from that early NLP, if you would call it that, to Erickson, to a sort of a post-Erickson self-relations, and now what we call generative change, which, as you say, from any sort of point of view, I think the work, if there's one word that you could use to describe the work, it's creativity. You know, and we don't see creativity as a sort of a special trait of a few remarkable geniuses, but we see creativity as the basic nature of all human reality. I think neuroscience has been converging pretty clearly on this idea that it's our nervous systems that are creating what we experience as reality. When you look at that creativity process, which is what the generative change work really looks to do, I think it's a conversation between different positions, different styles of consciousness, different realms, so forth. So hypnosis, you know, generally has this emphasis that the unconscious is the smart one and the conscious mind is the idiot. And in what I would call the first generation of hypnosis, you take a sledgehammer and knock out the conscious mind, and then you program the unconscious mind. And this is not exactly an ecological view, and it gives rise to the mistrust and the I think misplaced fascination with hypnosis. Erickson really radically changed hypnosis by emphasizing the unconscious as having this extraordinary wisdom, and emphasizing trance as not artificial. It's not something that is an artifact of suggestion, which is what a lot of hypnosis views believe, that you experience trance because I say deeper, 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 deeper. Erickson was really seeing that trance was a part of the natural fabric of human consciousness, like dreaming, like sleeping, like waking, and it was integral, and you didn't need hypnosis. In fact, it's been around for a millennium before Western hypnosis was around. Still, Erickson believed that the conscious mind was really pretty much the part of the problem, not the solution. So you looked at trance as a way to bypass or dissociate, or one of the worst things I think that came out of Ericksonian hypnosis was this emphasis on indirect communication, which I think is a very disrespectful way of thinking. Metaphorical, yes. Indirect, no. So the trance work I do, called generative trance, which is one of the kind of main parts of the generative change work, is really about setting up some sort of conversational state where you can have a conversation, a mutually respectful, a mutually reciprocal conversation between these sort of high quality versions of the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. And again, I think if you model creative people, I think this is what you'll see. You don't see, I just went into trance and, you know, everything changed. You see this really interesting conversation between, in some ways, you could call it the right brain and the left brain. That would be, I think, maybe simple, maybe perhaps oversimplified, but nonetheless, we're looking at conversations that create sustainable change. And we see that as a conversation between these different types of intelligence.
Wow, really interesting. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I'm curious. Did you start out with this realization from the beginning, and showed respect to the conscious mind as well, or was that something that you discovered during your course? Or
yeah, I mean, you know, I came of age. I'm from San Francisco. I came of age as a teenager in the late 60s. And San Francisco was sort of ground zero. And there was a big sort of cynical distrust of sort of the village consciousness, which you might say is the sort of the front man disembodied intellect that we call the conscious mind. So I was into altered states, not only drug, sex, rock and roll, but I started meditating when I was 14, and I just sort of got exposed to it by a friend, and I've been meditating virtually every day since then. I thought Erickson's work was so cool because you didn't have to go through this type of cliched psychotherapy conversation, but you could open this creative state, i.e. trance. And sorry, I'm going to turn off my email. There we go, excuse me. You could go into this state where, first of all your worries and all of your troubles would disappear. I thought, that's great. And second of all, as I was saying, Erickson had this sense that the unconscious is extraordinarily intelligent. And so the idea in Ericksonian hypnotherapy is if you could just get the person into a good trance, everything will take care of itself from there. I had to learn the hard way, like with most things, that I don't think that's really the case. That, as I say, you need this social, cognitive, verbal avatar, so to speak. It's your front man in the external world, and you need this what I would call this sort of quantum world of infinite possibilities. So it came slowly. I mean, actually, it sort of happened around 37 years old when my father died suddenly, and my daughter was born a couple weeks later. And my connection to Erickson, which had been this sort of deep trance identification, and I always thought if I can feel that connection, I'm tuned in. I know what to do. That connection was broken. That door slammed shut. And to my shock, and it was scary, it was confusing. I'm grateful to these traditions in that after maybe a month or so, I was able to take a few moments and review the situation and realize this is supposed to happen. That at least a few points in your life, you will go through these major crises where everything that you knew about yourself and all the ways you thought of doing things would no longer be available to you. And I thought, okay, this is one of them. And so out of that, what came to be called the Self-Relations, which was first published in the Courage to Love book, that began to emerge slowly. And part of it was from other things. I was doing a lot of martial arts, particularly Aikido. And so that brought the emphasis to an embodied centered. One of the main ways of understanding the creative unconscious. Secondly, it brought this sense that the unconscious is not really something that happens when you close your eyes. The unconscious, if you would use that term, is everywhere. And if you have to close your eyes to connect with it, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. If you're in the middle of some challenging situation, you say, can you hold that thought? I've got to close my eyes and go off into this ghetto world of trance. And then thirdly, Erickson is still my master of masters. And it's not like at this point I want to be like him, but there's rarely a day that goes by where I don't find some gratitude for the sort of model he was about being a human being and about dealing with the valences and vicissitudes of life. But one of the things I heard so often from patients of his, from students of his, over the years, is one of the things I learned from Erickson was when the shit hits the fan next, that's a technical term. And I always tell my clients, it's always a short distance away. What I learned from Erickson is that I would close my eyes, go into a trance, and listen to his voice telling me what I could do. And my feeling is, really? Is that the best you can do? I mean, that's sort of, infantilizing people that they have to carry around some dead guy's voice inside of them. And we hope, and we would think, for ecological and sustainable reasons, that you have to find your own voice. And that voice has to be integrated within the whole sort of mosaic, if you will, of your whole consciousness. And that's what's really going to allow you to be what we call generative. So it's been a slow emergence over 40 plus years.
Okay, fantastic. Um, do you still call what you do hypnosis, or
No, actually, I mean, it's such a disheartening term, because lay people and professional people alike, I think, have this idea, at least implicitly, that it's a relationship where one person is controlling another person. And I think we can safely say that's really part of the problem, not the solution. So in the most recent book, Generative Trance, I sort of formally abdicated that term hypnosis and really trying to claim trance as, again, something you see in every culture throughout time that's got many different forms, many different traditions. And that's what we need to connect with. And I think a good chunk of the Western hypnosis models really don't support people in finding the best of who they are.
I agree with you completely. I have a question, or maybe just a reflection. I'm a musician, and as a musician, what you do when you get on stage is you basically open the doors to all the other people on stage and enter the same space, and then you use that space. And if you're lucky, you can extend it into the audience, and you can create a mutual space. And that, for me, that's what you're saying.
You're speaking to the choir, brother.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. And, people have images and understandings. What does that mean? I mean, one of the things that I think was really great about Erickson is he would, say everybody's got their own specific meanings to things. So what does trust mean to you? Well, when you were 4, trust maybe meant something rather absolute. My mommy and daddy will always be here for me and will always be right. That's great for a 4-year-old. If you're 40 and you still have that complex equivalence, as they're called in NLP, you're in trouble. So what does it mean, that statement that you're making, which I completely resonate, what does that actually mean as a somatic state, as a set of cognitive patterning, and what we would call a field construction? I mean, what is your felt sense of your connection to your fellow musicians, to the audience? What sort of thinking are you doing within that generative space? How is your somatic consciousness attuned and active in that? And those, by the way, are what we call the 3 minds of generative change. I went to Catholic schools and went to an all-boys Jesuit high school in San Francisco, and I was kicked out of theology class as a senior. But I finally found an application for in the name of the cognitive and the somatic and the holy field. And we think of that as the three minds through which reality is being constructed. And so when we say, okay, as a musician, for example, or in your family, for example, or in your professional community, for example, what would it mean to reliably, sustainably be in that state that you're talking about? And one part is just let it happen, you know, which is sort of the key suggestion in not only all hypnosis, but of its many cousins. You have to be in that flow state. But it's hard work being spontaneous. You know, it takes a lot of practice to be spontaneous. And so the disciplines and the practices are so integral. And again, that's where the conscious mind really has to come in. So again, you know, you hear me talking about what is it to be at that intersection where those two worlds, the conscious, linear, analytical, detail-oriented, strategy, structure-based consciousness is really learned and practiced and really attentive to the ever-changing feedback that it's getting. And then how do you open to that X factor? You know, that's where, you know, the miracles happen, or that's where stuff you never thought of before are going to come in. So that's part of what we mean by the generative state.
I have another question in that case. So you have the cognitive, the somatic, and the, let's call it
Field.
the field. From a musician's point of view, the field is not limited to the people involved in the room and space. When good music happens, it's like you're connected with something bigger.
That's right.
Whatever that is, speaking
Yes.
through it. And that would be the state that in other cases might be called gnosis, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. Now you're getting into Teilhard de Chardin, speaking of Jesuit priests. Yeah, it may be too complicated an idea to express just in this brief interview, but each of those minds, we say, has two levels. There's a sort of a little circle and a big circle. The little circle is what the content is at any given moment. The big circle is, you know, what the Buddhists call original mind, which is empty but luminescent. So in the field of fields, or that mind of mind, you have this open space of presence, and you have this open space of consciousness. And then how you're representing a field, for example, is fluid. You know, one of my mentors at Stanford was Carl Pribram, who's the great neuroscientist who did all the holographic theories of the brain. And the NLP know Pribram especially from the notion of the tote mechanism. And Pribram and George Miller, Eugene Clanter developed that idea. And it was really one of the first late 50s ideas of feedback loops. And Pribram said later that one of the big mistakes that they made was they didn't include an observing consciousness that was standing outside of the values of the tote that could change the values. So, you know, a clear example of a tote would be a thermostat. You know, and you set the value at, say, 22 degrees. And then the thermostat is, sampling information from the environment, and it's checking it according to its image about where it wants to be. And if it's off, if it's basically there, then it does nothing. If it's off, it moves into action to change the temperature. That's a homeostat. You know, that's a feedback mind that is basically organized around the same state, homeostat. He said, really, in any intelligent system, you you have what is called a rheostat. And rheo is the Greek word for flow. So the way that you're representing some state, and it could be the field, it could be your idea of the future, it could be your belief about something, it could be what your goal looks like. In the rheostat, it's in flow. It's not changing every moment, but you pick a value. You say, okay, this is an idea. This is a way I'm thinking about what I'd like to do. And of course, in any creative activity, you know, they say in sports, the game plan works until the game begins. So you have to be adjusting your representational maps on an ongoing basis. So what constitutes the field could be my physical environment. It could be, in your case, what you're talking about, the musicians I'm playing with. It could be the audience. It could be the ancestors of all music from time immemorial. So those sort of attunements to, there's an infinite number of possible fields. There's an infinite number of possible cognitive states. There's an infinite number of possible somatic maps. And so, you know, Erickson used to say, actually, Bateson and Erickson, I think this is one of the places where they most deeply agreed, but Erickson said people come to see you because they're rigid, that they have a fixed map. And your job is to help them to get unrigid. And by the way, that to me is what one of the things that trance really does. It unbinds your maps. So you've got this sense of this is the way it should be, or this is the way that it looks, and it's not working for me. I got to take a step back, let go of the map, and in English, American English, we would say back to the drawing board. I got to go back into the source and let a new representational map emerge that hopefully will allow me to perform better. So yeah, so we don't want to be fundamentalists. I mean, we'd say fundamentalism is the most basic root of all violence. You know, the sense that the field means this, or the unconscious mind means this, or the conscious mind means this. We have traditions, and hopefully we have a lot of traditions. And like, so as a musician, you're drawing upon lots of different traditions. You know, and you don't know, maybe from note to note, which of those traditions or which of those reference structures is going to be most productive. But you're trying to be in a state where you can use the maps, but not be used by the maps.
Exactly. Yeah. One more question. I was really, really intrigued by what you said in the beginning. When you come to the point where you actually realize that everything that you realized up to a certain point might not be valid anymore.
Yes.
I mean, isn't like that a complete clearing of the slate and de-hypnotizing yourself, or is it the world that changes, or is it you, or is it the feel? Anything you'd like to say about that more, I think is fascinating.
Well, there is no world without you. I mean, that's really this sort of constructivist notion. There's no independent reality. Now, it doesn't, I'm not talking with a solipsistic view, which says that it's all you individually, but, you know, that you is individual, it's familial, it's cultural, it's species, et cetera, et cetera. So we're creating everything we know as reality. We will come to these points, and again, it's not every day, it can't be every day, where everything that we knew, our winning formula, now becomes useless and actually what's holding us back. If you can find a safe place and surrender your performance mind, your ego mind, I think really good things can happen. If you respond to the fear and the confusion by doubling down, I think that's where a lot of violence happens. And I think that's exactly what's happening on the world scale today. I think clearly we are in a place where the old road is rapidly fading, to quote Bob Dylan, that everything, our institutions, the way we do education, the way that we do banking, the way that we do government, the way that we interact from country to country, the way that we, think about gender and race, et cetera, it's all falling apart. It's all collapsing. And you would say, well, this is a good sign. If, however, it creates a lot of confusion and a lot of panic, if you white knuckle it, if you shut down and try to get back to the old way, there's tremendous violence that happens. And to me, people come to see me, they have a whole history of dissociating and doing self-violence against themselves, whether it's addiction or anger or whatever. These are ways of disconnecting at the time of crisis. If you look at, you can look at my country, and I have never been more embarrassed and ashamed to be American as I am today. And it's just crazy that we are moving towards a fascist state in the United States. And, when you look at it, how could that come to be? I think we're coming to the crisis point where all the old reference structures at very deep levels are no longer tenable. And so your response is either going into what in the generative change work we call crash, which is fight, flight, freeze, or fold. Anger, fear, disembodied intellect are just sort of collapsing into depression or inertia. From that state, you will create a lot of negative outcomes. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't always lead to positive outcomes. I'm in China a lot, and in China, the word for crisis, as probably many of you know, it has these double characters. One is danger, the other is opportunity. And so I think there's a lot of danger when we come to these places, but you will come to them. Every system, every marriage, every individual life, every professional life, every family, every culture will go through these death and rebirth cycles. And what we're trying to do is find the technologies and the relationships to give support to these living systems during those transition times, so we don't collapse into violence, but we can go forward into a next level of consciousness.
Okay, yeah. We had Robert Dills on visit a couple of years ago, and he talked about crash. That was one of the things, yeah. I was introduced to your work by an American who went to trance camp with you some years ago, and he did a session with me. I believe it was called something like 3-point attention.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it, for me, it really created a different kind of an experience. I don't know, I'm kind of putting you on the spot here. Would it be possible to do some sort of group exercise that could give the people here that experience, or I don't know if that's possible, or?
Yeah, well, that 3-point attention, it's not something that I wholly created. It's sort of a deep structure version of something you see in a number of different traditions. And it's an example of what we call, that Robert and I call the 6 steps of creativity. And the first is to develop what we call a coach state. Coach is an acronym, works great in English. Means centered, open, aware, connected positively, and hospitable to whatever shows up. Its sort of negative counterpart is crash, which means constricted, reactive, analysis paralysis, feeling separate and isolated, feeling hurt and hurtful. So we're saying you're only as good as your state. And so before you want to step up to the plate and look to meet any challenge or create something, it starts with going into some version of a coach state. 3-point attention is one example. So there's a number of different examples, but here I'll just do a little couple-minute version of one of my most typical ones. So we, in the conversation, say for a session, hey, say hi, how are you? How about that traffic? How about that goddamn American president, and etc. And then maybe you talk a little bit informally about what would you like to set as an intention or goal for the work here today. And it's good, a lot of people just need to talk for a couple of minutes. And then the segue, and this is how you would introduce trance, or this is how you would introduce the sort of the more generic versions in generative change of what we call the coach state. We say, I really get that that's important to you. I really get that you really want to create something around this particular area. For example, just working with somebody that you want a renewed intimacy in your marriage. I really want to support you in that. And to do that, I think a good thing for both of us is to start by developing a connection to the best of ourselves. Because we'll need it as a starting point, we'll need it as a continual reference point. There's a lot of ways to do that. Here comes the technique. One of the ways is to just look into this question when you need to really come back to yourself. So you've been working 40 days and 40 nights and you think, oh, I need a break. What is it that you find that really works for you? And, some usual suspects would be, I go for a walk, I go into nature, I play music, I read, I sit down and do some breathing exercises, I play with my pets, the usual suspects. I say, that's great. I'd like you to just let yourself pick one of those times. So to get into a coach state, just take a few moments and settle in and settle down and let yourself sort of hold the question, what would be an example of a time where I really, really felt this great positive connection to myself and to the world as a whole? So, Ulf was saying earlier, when I play music and I get lucky, I open this state. So the invitation would be for each of you, just for a couple of minutes, to let yourself find your own reference structure. When I need to reconnect with myself, when I need to come back home. One of the things that really is one of my go-to methods is X. What's X for you? So for me, for example, reading always does it. So when I read, I usually am feeling for the writer's voice inside of me. And when I feel it, it touches something quiets down, opens up, and I'm in. So take a few moments and just let yourself sense when I need to really connect positively to myself and the world, one thing that really helps is then pick a particular time where you experience that. So we always want to go from the general to the specific sensory details. So pick a particular time. So I was, walking in the forest last week. That's great. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is we're just going to take a few minutes and slow things down. So you can do this with your eyes open. You can do it with your eyes closed. Slow things down. And just take a few breaths. As you breathe, you relax your shoulders, you relax your forehead, relax your chest. And now just let yourself tune into the sensory details of that specific experience. So I got out of my car and went walking, went to the beginning of the forest. Great. So the first sensory detail could be a visual image, could be a sound, could be a smell or a taste, could be a body feeling. Just note that and breathe it up and down through your body. This is what we call moving it on the vertical axis. So just breathe that simple sensory detail up and down. Slow it down and just notice and watch and be curious. As you breathe that sensory detail up and down, what sort of experiential, pleasurable elements begin to awaken inside of you? You can then repeat that, identify a sensory detail, breathe it up and down through the vertical axes, slow it down, notice what it begins to awaken in you. So we could, take apart any experience. There's almost an infinite number of potential sensory details inside of it. And we focus on the sensory detail. We move it up and down vertically through a relaxed body. We bring in silence between the notes. We observe what our experiential mind gives us in return. We feel a sense of, that's interesting, that's right, thank you. And then we repeat that. So that would be a cycle of moving through these sort of feedback loops of sensory details of a positive experience that I think is a really good way for most people to find what we call this coach state. And what's really good, I think, is it taps into a person's own resources and a person's own preferences. And we know that, one of the beautiful things that Erickson gave us was that everybody's got a unique identity matrix. We could say everybody's got a psychological immune system. And so if you want sustainable change, you have to use images and beliefs and values that are inside of that existing matrix, because you have to change it from the inside out. So by developing these coach states, or you might call them a generative trance state, by going through a person's own experiential reference structures, I think it also helps a lot in terms of the sustainability of any change that you're hoping for. That's my example.
Very nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Really, really enjoyed that.
Yeah. So that's the starting point. We say in the generative change work Robert and I have been developing this International Association for Generative Change, IAGC. And just as a little plug, you can find out about it by going to my website, stephengilligan.com. Operators are standing by. Or iagc.info, I-N-F-O. And you can get a lot of information and videos, etc., about this and about what it means, again, to practice this creative state that allows people really to move forward in really, really great ways in their life.
Great. What would be, for people who are checking out the sites, what would be the next step to learn more about teaching? Is it one of your books, or I know you just released a new audio series?
I did. It's actually on both sites, but you really see it on the stephengilligan.com. I just came out 2 months ago with a generative change audio series that I think has 38 different audios, each about 15 minutes, that are organized around these 4 sections of the 6-step model for generative change, how to develop a coach state. We just did one of those. There's you need to have a toolbox, and there's 10 different ways to do what I just gave one example for. There's a 3rd section on sort of challenges or chunkings for practitioners of generative change. And then the 4th section is in application areas like healing emotional wounds, sleeping better, couples intimacy, et cetera, et cetera. I'm on the road 70% of the time, and Robert is too. I'm actually on my way on Monday. I'll be in Europe for 5 weeks. So I come to Europe 3 times a year. I'll start in Cologne, where Robert and I begin module 1 of the generative coaching 15-day certification. Then I go to Paris and Morocco, and then I swing by and hook up with Robert again in London, where we do module 1 of generative coaching. And then I go to Romania and St. Petersburg. So, the trainings are obviously the way to really get the training. The books are all online. There are some, videos, and most of my articles and chapters are actually posted on the stephengilligan.com website. So if you're interested, hope to see you.
Would you like to say anything about the Trance Camp?
Yeah, well, Trance Camp is actually in San Diego. That's the sort of the mothership and the grandfather. That's a 3-week deal where we do a 6-day basic, a 6-day advanced, and a 5-day supervision workshop every July in San Diego. What's great about that is we get people from all over. In July, we had, I think, 22 countries out of 60 people. And that's special. I have exported Trance Camp into 12-day certification trainings that happen in Paris. That's a 3-4 day. Then Germany, and Russia's coming up in St. Petersburg. I do 2 in China every year, in Japan, in Latin America. So that's really about, the experiential workshops for how to live, breathe, think, and find this sort of mind-body practice of generative trance. And it's a lot of fun. You go where no man, no woman has gone before. One of the great things I got from Milton Erickson is that infinite possibilities in consciousness, and most importantly, Erickson was, his ancestors are from Norway, uh, and he really lived. His strongest value was life is to be enjoyed every day, and consciousness is completely a variable. And so you should get on board and see the many interesting, enjoyable things that you can create every day. So that really gets amplified in TransCam.
Fantastic. Sounds great. I know we're at the end of the time here. I'm just very curious. You're doing this trans work, connecting people to their to the field and beyond, all over the world in very different cultures. Russia is a very specific culture. So is China. And is there any? What do you notice most? Similarities or peculiar differences?
Similarities.
Right.
I think, and to me, it's one of the most heartening things that I have gotten from teaching all over, is the shared humanness is much deeper than the cultural differences. And we ignore cultural differences at our peril, as you know, as same with individual differences. But when you get into the work and get into the heart of work, it's the same. I feel it's the same everywhere. You know, that there's just this beautiful, I mean, I think you could say all the same about music. And, you know, I love music. And sometimes these days when I'm home for a couple of weeks, I take an evening and I just go surfing on YouTube and to find all these music videos. And I, you know, I've got it hooked up to a great stereo. And I was just listening the other day. We went from Yo-Yo Ma playing with these bluegrass people to Adele, to this, what's her name, Erica Badu,
Yeah, yeah.
to this, these,
Rimshot.
yeah. Uh, and it's like, oh yeah, it's really different, but they're all playing music. And I you know, I couldn't help but think, as I think, you know, a lot, I imagine most of us think with a lot of heartache about some of the stuff that, a lot of the stuff that's happening in the world. It's a really dark time in a lot of ways, and it doesn't look like it's going to change immediately. So I'm thinking, God, if people could just be playing music
Yeah.
at the beginning of any sort of meeting, you know, or sometimes, you know, and even I have clients do this when they're in a problem state, is we have to do the whole conversation as a musical. I want to say my baby is hurting me. And, you know, and you see we're laughing, of course, but that's where things like the blues came as, you know, this great healing legacy in the African American culture.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
you see the stuff they were dealt with and still are dealt with, and it's hard for me to imagine, you know, how they survived. You know, all the stuff of being African American. But music was one of their venues, and you know, it's a community and a way of accessing these states of consciousness that then give a place for you to deal with the difficult things of life.
And also, I would just like to add, I mean, I work a lot with trauma in Rwanda and Congo in Africa.
Oh, yeah.
And
Didn't know that. That's interesting.
well, we work with first aid through tapping procedure,
Yeah,
emotional
yeah.
first aid, but always at the end of a group session, because it's always group sessions and community healing, we always do music. And
who's a neighbor of mine here in Encinitas.
Wow.
And I think this principle of what I call neuromuscular lock
Yeah.
is really the underlying principle of all lasting negative states. And trauma gives you a really heightened special case of it. But there are many versions. But neuromuscular lock is sort of the opposite of creative flow. And creative flow, I don't mean just, California airy fairy, but a sense where you can be able to experience each moment in and of itself, and it breathes into the next moment, the next moment, the next moment, and you're able as some sort of present observing consciousness to make use of what's happening and to look to see what creative responses that you can make in that moment that help. So yeah, so musicality, I really emphasize in the training, when you look at the history of human development, there are a lot of people who say now that music is the first human language, and then came poetry, and then came literality. And if you want to access a generative state, which gives people a way to release from this negative lock into a single reality and open to this flow of the quantum field, musicality, and I don't mean that you have to have musicians playing instruments on the stage. One of the basic exercises we do in trance camp on the second day is what we call get your boom booms out. and one person has their hand on a person's shoulder and it's just doing the boom boom, boom boom. And then second coach is doing nonsense trance, etc. And I think that's what opens the creative unconscious. You still got a lot of work to do, but it opens the playing field where a lot of possibilities are available to you.
Yeah, it opens the playfulness, right?
Playfulness, well, I'd say, we always say there's three general universal archetypal qualities that you need: playfulness, tenderness, and fierceness.
Mm.
You got to have all of them. So you have to have these positive versions. A fierceness, a good bullshit detector, keeping your focus on something, calling people to be serious. You need tenderness to be able to put people at ease, to bring calmness, to bring gentleness and kindness. And you definitely need playfulness when the going gets tough. If you lose your sense of humor, it's all over.
I really, really love that. That would rhyme well with a Buddhist view as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think what we're trying to do is sort of, Ken Wilber, the great American transpersonal writer, likes to say that one of the most important conversations of our time is between Buddha and Freud. He's speaking, of course, metaphorically, but I really resonate with that. So all the stuff we've done in the West with personal development and psychotherapy and looking at how problems develop and are resolved, along with all this beautiful field-based, mindfulness-based, original mind stuff in East Asia with Buddhism as a central example. I think really that there's a beautiful marriage that can obtain between those two traditions. And that's already one of the main focuses of the work. They each give you something that the other lacks.
Yeah, and it sounds like, or it would make sense from a thermodynamic point of view, that if a lot of people get connected to the field, a lot of tension will even out.
I think so. Yeah, I agree. I mean, the field is one level is the sense of resonance. You know, I think resonance is probably the most important language of human connection. And so when you've got all these nervous systems in resonance, good things happen. You're working from a different reality base, and it goes. You lose it all the time. You know, so we're just anticipating that if you can go 5 minutes with sustained resonance, that's really good. But the trick is, you know, I studied Aikido for many years, and there's a perhaps apocryphal story of Morihei Ueshiba, the founder. Two students were talking to him and said, Sensei, you never lose your center. And he said, nonsense, I lose my center as much as the next person. I just come back faster. I come back without going to the bar for 5 days, without blaming those idiots over there, without telling myself, you know, blaming myself. I just say, whoops, I gotta reconnect. I gotta reconnect. And then open to the field, and then hopefully learn to bring this disciplined cognitive awareness that can think without shutting the field down. You know, to me, that's one of the things that trance really shows you how to do. And by the way, as you probably know, Milton Erickson was paralyzed from polio during the formative years of his life. At 17, for at least 5 years. And so he had to learn how to think without any muscular contraction, which is really interesting, because I think that's how the conscious mind is created, through discontinuities, arrhythmia, and muscular tension. And so we're trying to find that place where you have what, maybe it's not the best term, nerve awareness. So something's flowing through your nerves and informing your muscles, but you're not locking it inside of your muscles. That's what we mean by neuromuscular lock. And as soon as you lock it, the quantum field is closed off to you, and you're basically going to rearrange the chairs on the Titanic. You're just going to repeat versions of the past.
And that would tie in well with what Peter Levine is saying as well, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and what Peter's doing, what's really good, that is a really important version of generative trance, is really respecting and starting a conversation with what he would call the organism, what we might call the unconscious or the somatic, in terms of you're not trying to just do self-improvement, you know, where you're programming your unconscious to do better and sit up straight and, you know, concentrate better, and but you're actually asking it to teach you, and that's what Peter, I think, has brought into the trauma work, that I think is really great. I think that's really an integral part of the next step in our, of all these different traditions that I think are cousins to each other.
But also what you said about the muscles actually locking down on it, stopping the communication with the field, because that is what Peter says about blockings in the energy system. So that would put the energy system as part of the communication system to the field.
Exactly.
Thank you. That resonates really, really nicely with a lot of stuff. Thanks a lot.
So it's not a regression back to the unconscious. It's a progression to trying to find this harmony between the two systems.
Yep.
And it's what art is. You know, we could call, you know, life as a performance art. You know, and we have this capacity, but it's a daily practice. The more we practice in a good way, the better we get. The less we practice, the worse we get. Do you have a preference?
I believe in practice and rest. I think the rest is when this stuff actually happens.
Well, all the creativity models basically go on these 4 steps, which is really give it your full focus and give it your best effort. That's step 1. And then when you hit the wall, take a break. It's called the incubation. And if you're lucky, as you said earlier, and if you're practiced, and if you're motivated, something pops in. That's the illumination, the aha. And then the fourth step is, I know it in principle, but now I have to actually put it into reality. And I get back to the hard work. So I see that four-step model as really two steps, which is conscious mind as the lead, unconscious mind as the lead. You know, and we have a saying in American card playing, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them.
Yeah, exactly.
The rest is really, 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 really important. Okay, I got to go to yoga. Speaking of rest.
There's a discussion on the chat. Just you were saying tenderness, playfulness, and I thought you were saying fierceness. But were you saying fearlessness?
No, I said fierceness, which
Fierceness, right?
surprising to me, a word that doesn't translate well into most other languages.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about Swedish, but most of them are only negative connotations. But this sense of this passion and this fire and this commitment and this ability to, you know, to find your resilience and your ability to bring this positive intensity into the connection. And it's really important because sometimes you need to challenge yourself and you need to challenge people. And you can't just be in a well-relaxed and whatever happens. So fierceness is what gives you the courage, you know, to face things that you know is going to bring a lot of difficulty. They say,
So, from a religious point of view, that would be the equivalent of a strong faith.
A strong faith would be one version of fierceness. And again, in any difficult task, it's really important to be, you know, if you're coaching people, to get them connected to their commitment and their fierceness. And, you know, one of the things we do in terms of, you know, one of the things in terms of generative state are what resources do you need? And one of the questions is, as you face the challenge you're facing, and you sense your present state and how you would be likely to respond, what do you think would be most helpful to have? A resource of fierceness that gives you courage, protection, a resource of playfulness, or a resource of kindness, starting with yourself. And a lot of times we have people just move through each of those to be able to have a sense of what do I really need to cultivate more to put myself in a state where I can move through this in a good way, you know, helpful to me and hopefully helpful to others.
Right. Do I stand like a rock or do I flow like a river?
Yeah. Now can I go to yoga?
Yeah, you can. Sorry. It's just so much fun.
We could do it again. I really appreciated the conversation.
It's been so much fun. We really, really enjoy it. It's been extremely generous. Well, I'll just speak for myself. I truly enjoyed this. This made my day, my week. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah, it's great for me too. And thank you to all of you listening. Hope it's helpful for you.
You get a Swedish applause.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you know, when I'm in, you heard probably the joke that the Norwegians tell about the Swedes and the Swedes tell about the Norwegians, right? It's about this Swedish guy who loved his wife so much he almost told her. That's said with great love for the Swedish.
So you've been teaching in Norway, huh?
I haven't for about 10 years, but I've been in Sweden, I've been in Norway.
Yeah. Oh, we look forward to meet one day. Thank you so much.
Okay, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.